Right. Hello, everybody. Yay. Oh my gosh, I see some familiar faces and some longtime friends. Hi, Alex. I'm going to give this just another minute because we are expecting a nice big group today. So, and then I'll do just a little bit of housekeeping to kick things off. And I'll hand it over to Gino in half a second because he is the reason that you are all here and you're in for a treat. So let me just admit all of these folks. All right. It's great to see so many of you. And let's see, there's just a quick little flurry of folks coming in right here at the end. Alrighty, anybody else? Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. My name is Jenny Hinchcliffe. I'm the Director of Exhibitions here at the San Francisco Center for the Book. I'm very excited to see all of you online today, and I'm thrilled to be the host for this month's artist, Gino Robair. A little bit of housekeeping. If everyone could keep their microphone turned off for now, that would be excellent. You can leave your camera on so that Gino can see you. We always love to see all of the smiling faces and the friendly waving hands. You will not be in the recording, but this is being recorded, just so everyone knows. You can message Jenny, SFCB, with your questions for Gino, and we'll be reading those at the end of the presentation. So we'll just be reading them out. So if you have any questions, just go ahead and message me, and I'll direct them to Gino once we wrap up his presentation and slideshow. Let's see, a little bit about Gino. Gino Robair's artistic practice examines how systems of human interaction are influenced by perceptions of materiality. He is currently working towards his PhD in performance studies at UC Davis. His research focuses on papermaking and letterpress printing as forms of embodied choreography, a performative process that puts artists in conversation with their tools, materials, and ambient environment. Using the Vandercook press as a musical instrument and a practical studio tool, the performative results of these interactions are ephemeral memory objects. Gino's letterpress prints have been exhibited at the Center for New Music in San Francisco and Presso RAKU in Sardinia. As a drummer, he has recorded with numerous musicians, including Tom Waits, Nina Hagen, and John Zorn. Currently, Gino is staging his piece Radical Divination, in which papermakers create scores in real time for musicians to interpret, and we'll see a quick video of one of those performances during this presentation today. Premiering in 2023 at the Berkeley Art Museum, the work has been performed in London, Gothenburg, and throughout Italy and Sardinia. I am honored to introduce Gino Robair to the group today. Take it away, Gino.
Thank you very much, Jenny. It's an honor to be here, and I'm going to pull up my slideshow here. Welcome, everyone. It's an honor to be invited to be part of the San Francisco Center for the Books series, and the organization has been a big part of my journey, and it's an outstanding community resource. So let me share screen with you. And let's see, got buttons pushed. There we go. Okay, minimize this little distraction in the corner, like so. There we go. All right, so I'm Gino. I make paper, I print, and you can see a few little examples here, including some deckled edges. That's one of the interesting parts of paper making is that you get to experience how the fiber changes over time, how it behaves. It's always kind of different, and it changes based, as you're making it, it's changing based on the ambient conditions in the room, because the water temperature and the humidity in the room and all these kind of things play a role in how the fibers form on the mold within the slurry that you're working with. And it's very much an experimental practice that I enjoy because I feel like I am collaborating with the material. I have to really pay attention to what it wants to do and what it has to say. As a colleague of mine in Sardinia, Sylvia Corda says, paper is anarchy. And in a sense it is. It really has its own behavior, and you just have to deal with it. But I'll start with the printing aspect of my practice first, and it'll come around to why I do both. I've done most of my printing at the Center for the Book using the Vandercook proof press. You can see the press bed here. The main reason has to do, main reason I use it has to do with gravity, because I can just set things down, and I'll explain a little bit more of why this is important later on. A quick look at my own studio. This is my mid-19th century iron hand press. It is a Hoe and Company Washington press, built, I don't know, 1860s in that era. Behind it are several cases of type, assorted furniture, and spacing. I purchased these from Phil and Anna Morrison here, very close to where I live in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. They ran a press called Shoestring Press, which specialized in printing miniature books that were finely bound. Very beautiful work. Consequently, I have a lot of small point size typefaces in these cases, like as in 6 and 8 point, as well as assorted wood type and cliches, image blocks. Here's the press with the press bed out from under the platen, and the tympan is in the up position. That's Chad from the San Francisco Center for the Book in the back, who kindly helped me with the final tweaks of my press bed. Here is the press bed again, looking down with some furniture and a woodcut held in place by magnets. The printable area on a Vandercook is a lot larger than this press. So when I want to do something that is poster size, this system doesn't work. But one advantage that this Washington press has is because it's an iron hand press, I can actually easily adapt it to use European sized blocks. That's blocks that are type high at 0.927 of an inch, a little bit higher than the US standard, which is 0.918. Over the years, I've picked up a lot of these kind of European style size blocks at flea markets when I'm traveling. My printing and papermaking practices are actually an extension of my musical life. I began letterpress printing because as a composer, I wanted to print my own graphic scores. This example is a score that borrows from the iconography of John Cage's Variations, where he would drop things onto a page like string or little transparent sheets. And that was his way of creating performance scores from physical objects, and each score would be slightly different each time he put one together. So the inspiration for my printing work is based on such performance practices as well as improvisation. Rather than meticulously planning ahead of time what I will do, I begin with a concept and allow myself to follow the lead of the tools and the materials that I'm working with. And I often mix printing formats. In this example, I letterpress printed yellow and black images over a 2-color risograph print that had red musical staff lines and blue triangular and square shapes. A risograph looks like a copier, but it's actually a digital printing device that scans whatever image you put on there and then creates a sort of screen, and then screen prints the image in some fluorescent color of your choosing. But what's interesting is that the screen actually isn't at a high resolution. It ends up having an effect on the thing that you've scanned. So if you were to look closely at this score, the lines of the musical staff lines there are a little bit jagged in a very interesting way. So I find that the risograph process is kind of like a nonlinear transformation device for graphics. And plus you get these excellent colors. So I think of printing overall, the elements and the paper as my collaborators in the creative process. And once I put the idea into motion, I wait and see what my collaborators have to say. And because I typically use recycled and repurposed materials, which vary widely in terms of size and texture and materiality, this conversation is pretty exciting and unpredictable. So it's a little bit like having a duet partner, or being in a trio with musicians, where I'm dealing with the printing press, the paper, and myself. We're sort of working together in a really fun way. I also consider the creative act itself as a form of divination. In that moment, we're experiencing a vision of the future possibilities that we have access to, and that we are setting into motion as we assemble a reading of our materials. When improvising as a printer, I experience these moments where I'm absorbed in the creative act and I lose track of time. And it's this meditative state that we all experience as artists, where we feel as if we've become one with our materials. And this is the techniques that I've developed in printing and papermaking are intended to sort of foreground that experience. And I see these moments as analogous to the focus that is used by people who specialize in forms of divination, tarot readers, for example, because it requires one to be completely open and let go of any thoughts that restrict creativity. I'm also interested in what inspires discovery. What does someone, or how does someone re-energize and refocus their practice? As a composer, I often ask myself, what tasks can I give a performer that they'll find satisfying yet challenging enough to nudge them out of their usual patterns and into uncharted territory? In this slide, this is a quartet game board. The two upper sections, the two lower sections, each for a player, and we move these little pieces around, which we assign, at some point, we assign each piece some kind of meaning that helps us determine what to play as musicians. And I printed this for a research project I'm involved in at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden through Chalmers Institute. So to do this kind of open improv style with a letterpress, in this case, the Vandercook, I developed a freestyle approach to the proof press where I don't lock up the elements that I'm printing. When you are printing with a letterpress, typically you make sure that all of your letters and sorts and cliches are locked in so they cannot move when the press is working. And I don't do that because I want to be able to move things around. So that's where I rely on gravity. So having a flat bed press like this Vandercook or like my Washington press is a way to allow me to be more hands-on. And this allows for not only for improvising, but it allows me to change the elements. Even if I have an idea for a series of pieces, I can change the elements quickly between each print. So I'm using a minimal amount of furniture in this freestyle printing, and I'm very careful to use only the sorts and the cliches that are at least 1 inch by 1 inch wide, or 2.5 centimeters by 2.5 centimeters, which is a suggestion of one of my printing teachers who teaches at the center, Alan Hillesheim. That way, there's less chance of something that can be knocked over or crushed by the cylinder. In this photo, I have marked off an area where the paper and the blocks will meet. You can see the paper at the very top there. It's going to go over the cylinder and print within the lines of the blue tape. And so for each print, in this scenario, the blocks are rearranged based on a game I created using dice. So we roll the dice and it determines where the blocks go in that little area there. I also have options in how to apply ink to the paper. So for example, I can use the rollers to ink it up. So in this case, you can see that the rollers have a sort of a yellow color on them. Or I can hand ink each of the blocks, and that way I can print multiple colors at a time. Then I can either place the paper directly onto the inked surface of the blocks, or I can use the cylinder to deliver the paper. And the reason I choose one method over the other has to do with the size of the paper being printed. So the one we're looking at right now is actually the size of a small paperback book. And I often use recycled paper and offcuts that I find at the center to print on and many of them are too small to go over the cylinder. So that's why I will place them directly onto the inked blocks. And then in order to print them, I roll the cylinder over in print mode. For those of you who know the Vandercook, I roll the cylinder over in print mode, but with the rubber rollers disengaged, so they're not re-inking or messing with the ink at all. So it's just the cylinder itself pressing down, kind of as a pressure print into the blocks on the press bed. Another method I use is a form of pressure printing. In this case, I take a piece of make-ready paper, which is basically a piece of scrap paper, and I roll ink on it with a brayer. So in this case, in this photo, you can see that I used blue and black. And then I stick that wet piece of paper onto the page that I want to have the image impressed upon. So I call that my target page. Then I place this sandwich onto the wood or lead blocks that are on the press. So that in that way, the ink from my make ready page is distributed onto my target page in the shape of the letters or blocks, that whatever blocks I'm using. And the result is a lot more painterly than you would normally get when you're using letterpress in a normal fashion. And sometimes the sort of waste sheet, the make ready sheet itself, becomes the focus of my creative acts. And in this case, you can see that I printed on so many other different pages that it came up with its own kind of shape, which I liked very much. And the interesting part about this is that it's not very high quality paper. It's certainly not acid free, but you know, it is what it is, and I get real excited when something nice turns out like this. So there we have it. Lo-fi, we might say. Another pressure printing technique that I'm using, and this is something I've been working with in the last couple of months, is a transfer technique where I am using the ink from a newspaper to impress onto the target page in the shape of the lead or wood blocks that I also have in there. So the sandwich that I'm creating here is that I have the wood blocks touching the newsprint, and then I basically roll over that so that it impresses the newsprint into my target page with the ink from the newspaper. The transferred text appears in reverse, which is also a really nice thing. So in this case, you can see the X's and O's. I would have, against this target paper, I would have the newsprint on top of this, which I guess this is watercolor paper. I'd have it touching the watercolor paper, and then the block is pressing through the newsprint into the watercolor paper. It doesn't actually adhere the newsprint into the paper. It's just the ink gets transferred. So one of the benefits of working this way is that I don't have to clean the Vandercook's rubber rollers because I haven't had to ink them up, and that saves a lot of time at the end of a session. So, and you can see in this case with this Buddha, you get the sense that even the little tiny lines can accept the ink in the transfer in a really nice way. So in this slide is a series that I did using this kind of newsprint transfer method. It's an homage to Jasper Johns and his series called 0 through 9, in which he drew or painted the consecutive numbers 0 through 9 on top of each other. When I recreated this piece, I alternated between black newsprint text and color ads so that each of the numbers in the series are somewhat visible, while allowing the differences in each finished piece to shine through. So it turns out that every time I do a performance of this piece, a different number kind of stands out based on the order of, you know, black against color texts. So in this one, you kind of see a 2 and an 8, and in the next slide, you'll see that the 7 popped out a little bit more. There's a little bit of the 8 and the 6 hiding in there. So what drew me to recreating Johns's piece is it's the performativity of it, where you start with 0 and add consecutive numbers directly on top of their predecessor. So it's a bit of a process piece like we have in other performing arts, music and dance and so forth. This photo shows the setup that I used for that piece. And I did use some furniture for this because it was a lot easier to keep things aligned as much as possible. So the paper I'm printing on in this case is on the bottom facing up. Now I've placed a little piece of newsprint against that paper, and then the number is facing down onto the back of the newsprint. The wooden furniture and the piece of tape act as a sort of rough registration system that leaves me a little wiggle room in the placement of the numbers.
Gino, can I ask you a fast question?
Sure.
A question came through that applied to the previous slide and
Yeah.
actually to this one too. Renee Perry is curious to know if pressure is truly enough to transfer the ink from newsprint.
Great question, Renee. It is, in fact, but it has to be newspaper. It turns out that phone books, the ink doesn't transfer from phone books, but it does from newspapers. And it's the newsprint that is not, like when you get, sometimes you get a newspaper, it has coated paper inside with some of the ads. You don't want to use that. But the Vandercook press, the cylinder is pushing down pretty significantly. So it does transfer the ink. And I mean, there's still ink on the paper when you pull it off, but it does transfer to the paper. And you don't have to use, this photo here has watercolor paper. This photo here is also a watercolor paper, but I've done it on Mohawk Superfine. And in fact, the nice thing about something like Mohawk Superfine, which is not so thick and dense, is that the colors pop out more. You don't get quite the bite that you see here with the shadowing, but you do get a lot richer colors. So I'm kind of experimenting with both ways to do it. In this case here with this piece, this is a standard letterpress print, both a blind print and an inked print.
And then Gail had a question about this particular cut. She's wondering how those crazy letters are laid out.
Good question. So when I've been in the center, working, I'll occasionally find a single letter floating around somewhere on the floor or in a box. So we call those orphaned sorts, right? A sort is a letter in a typeface. And so I started to collect these orphan sorts into a frame. So that frame is a one-piece frame, and I would kind of put them into this little box. And at some point, I had enough to print. So I started to do blind prints and then also inked prints with that. So it was kind of a project that lasted several months until I felt like I had enough of these things. And then it was fun. It was kind of fun to see when you look at it. You'll see one at the end. When you look at it, your mind starts to, of course, pick out words and sentences that obviously I didn't intend. Good question.
Thank you.
So once I began printing my own scores, I quickly realized how much of an influence paper quality has over the results, just as it does in any artistic practice, as you know. But when I took an intro to papermaking class at the center, I was immediately hooked. I thought, okay, this is what I have to do. So my PhD, as Jenny mentioned, is at UC Davis, excuse me, in the Performance Studies program. And my thesis topic has been narrowed down significantly to just about developing the performance-based language for papermaking. So even though I'm working a lot with letterpress printing, the actual dissertation will cover only the papermaking part. And there's plenty to talk about, let's put it that way. So starting with the basic craft skills, that is to say that the traditional choreographies of papermaking, I've located points within that choreographic process where improvisation can happen. So places in papermaking where you can have more than one option about what to do next. Typically, when you're making paper that's going to be for sale and you want everything to be consistent, you have to follow a general line of procedures. And I'm trying to find a way to break out of that. So in order to foreground these performative aspects of papermaking, I downplay the craft-based objective of making consistent sheets of paper in favor of a more sculptural approach. And I refer to these as either paper objects or memory objects. This slide is from a performance in Cagliari, Sardinia with visual artist Stefania Preti. And we are in a duet situation here, responding to text words that gives us a sort of an imaginative approach to, putting pulped paper on screen and then combining it on top of each other's pages like a collage. So to expand the papermaking choreography, I composed this piece called Radical Divination, where two papermakers interact with each other as a duet while they work. As each paper object is created, it is hung on a line for musicians to interpret as graphic scores. This slide is from the premiere at BAMPFA, which is the UC Berkeley Art Museum in 2023. Michelle Wilson is on the right there. She was the papermaking partner for this performance. And for those of you in the Bay Area, you recognize many of the improvising musicians in this shot here. So in the duet, the papermakers respond to text prompts as they interact with each other. And I chose words for those prompts that can be read as either a noun or a verb. And they have nothing to do with papermaking in general. They're just words that seem to be, for me, they just seemed interesting. I'd like to see what somebody would do with this when you have a mold and a decal and you're making paper. I don't have a traditional papermaking studio. My setup is designed for travel, and I think of it kind of as a punk rock form of papermaking, because the objective is to go on the road and share the practice with anyone who's interested. So I use a normal blender to pulp recycled paper. So on the left is some cardstock that I had gotten that was goldenrod and yellow. So I mixed the colors, and then the right there you can see the pulp that has been squeezed dry a little bit, so it's ready for work. In this photo, the flyers that I got from the Center for the Book were mixed there are different types of cardstock and paper. So I soaked them overnight, and then I put them in the blender to get this lovely pulp on the right, which is kind of pinkish with colorful speckles in it that is from the crushed up ink. And this photo was taken in Ferrara, Italy, where my piece was staged in the city's historic jazz club. On this tour, I brought sheets of paper rather than pulped paper. And I brought the sheets in various colors, and then I would pulp them the day of the concert, which I found to be very time consuming and kind of problematic because you had to find a place to do it. So I changed the approach for the next tour. So in subsequent tours and what's coming up next month, I pulp the paper in advance at home, and I sun dry it in these kind of black tubs. And then I weigh them, and I put them into little bags for the journey. That way, when I get to the venue, all I have to do is rehydrate each of the colored pulps with a blender, which you don't need a kitchen for. You can do it even on stage before anyone shows up. Here is one of my 2 suitcases I took to Europe last November. Each baggie has 250 grams of dried pulp, which is what I need for each color in a concert. It looks a bit suspicious. And thankfully, paper doesn't have a scent that the dogs are trained to find. So far, so good, knock on wood. The best thing about this setup here is that the suitcase actually weighs almost nothing when it's fully packed like this. And then when I'm done with the concerts, I have room to put things like books, which I typically come home with. I also do papermaking workshops in each city that I visit. So I bring some bagged pulp for these events. This workshop took place in a museum in the Sardinian town of Moro. One aspect of touring as a papermaker is that at the end of the concert, I have a stack of wet score pages. You can see them hanging here, as well as a heavy pile of wet towels and tubs of unused pulp. The tubs I can dry at a laundromat the next morning, and I can reclaim the pulp for the next show. But what do I do with the dripping wet scores, right? Like, they won't be dry enough the next day to take on a train, right? So I had to figure out a way to deal with this. The first concert, we just sort of bagged them up and put them in the recycling bin. But consequently, since then, I've come up with a nice, what I feel is a satisfying solution, at least for me, is I invite the audience to take the scores home with them after the performance. So I will explain that they can take part in the next phase of the piece by choosing a score that they find interesting and experiencing the transformations of the paper as it dries on the backing. So that white sheet that he's holding is the backing that the paper is sitting on. It's not stuck to it. Once the paper dries, it easily comes off. But the paper will actually shrink and start to curl in interesting ways. The color will change. It will be less vibrant, but the texture will start to come through. It's quite interesting to see this happen. And I think most people don't realize that when you make paper, it can have these qualities. In this slide, this was from the London performance at Cafe Auto. The percussionist Bebe Wong, who was in the piece, is on the left, and her father, who had just arrived in town, is on the right. And they got to take home, each got to take home a score to help to participate in this next aspect of the piece. Here's an example of a score I printed using the Vandercook on a sheet of paper that I made, which is about, again, the size of a sort of paperback book. In this case, I've used a map. That's the sort of squiggly lines are from a map, and then I've got other elements that were improvised on top. Here is another version using the same pulp, but for some reason, little bits of blue snuck in and affixed themselves to the top, which is, I guess, part of the score when somebody interprets it. Here are two examples of paper I made using leaves from a plant in my garden. Basically, it's a Cercis canadensis mexicana, which is has these really beautiful orange leaves when they drop. And I made two versions of the page, one with a really intense leaves and another one that I was able to kind of convince to be a little bit more stable and more page-like. And with that, I would like to show a few seconds of a performance. This is the performance in Ferrara in the jazz club. And it's just a few seconds because it goes on and on, but you get a sense of the music is completely improvised based on what the musicians are seeing as we create the paper pages. The musicians are actually not only watching the scores, but they're also watching the paper makers. They're basing their interpretation also on the movement of our arms and aspects of our choreography. So, and then the paper makers are listening to the music in order to gain influence from the sounds that they're hearing. So it's sort of a feedback loop of inspiration that has been put into this piece that I find very fascinating to work with. So let me show you two last slides. This is a form of printing that is not improvised that I did for the small plates for the San Francisco Center for the Book when I was invited 2 years ago to take part in that. It's a do-si-do style with fold out pages. And then finally, another version of that piece of orphaned sorts so that you can see the actual letters, you know, in their basic form throughout that frame. And that wraps up the slideshow presentation. How are we doing on time?
We're good on time. There were just a couple questions. Would it be possible for you to go to the London slide of the percussionist and her father?
Sure.
Someone had a question about those particular scores and how they're made.
Okay.
Judy was wondering if the scores, thank you, if the scores are done on Pellon. And something that I hadn't quite realized, and you explained to me when we were looking at these particular scores, is that they're they're actually not like sheets of paper. Like there is this real movement as people are creating them, and so there are these like windows and sections where the pulp actually drops out.
Yes,
Can you
exactly.
talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Um, yes, so we're using Pellon, sheets of Pellon. And Pellon is interfacing that you use when you're working with clothing. You can use it either for creating patterns or you can use it inside when you're sewing things. But I buy it by the roll and cut it to size to fit various needs and the sizes of my molds and decals. And so the great thing about it is that you can reuse it. It's cheaper than using real felts, but it works really well. And in this case, I don't mind somebody taking it home because, you know, it's not expensive. So in this case, you can see that the colors in that sheet that he's holding, there's a black gesture in the back, and then there's this kind of somebody that did the pink made some scraping marks. So it might have been, you know, the pink part done first, and then somebody was splashing black on top of it. What's really interesting about this is that when the Pellon comes off and you turn the paper object over, you see the process in the order in which it was done. You see the first gesture first, right? So what we're looking at now is the last gesture of the duet performance on this in this sheet of paper. But when you take it off the Pellon, you see it the first gesture, which is kind of interesting to me. And I have lots of slides showing that, but you know, too much for now. So in this, if you look at this picture here, you can see on the very right, there's a white page with three sort of rust-colored sheets of paper. So that was, for whatever reason, the text prompts helped create that, inspire that. Whereas on the far left, you can see it's a lot more exploded and broken apart. So that one has a lot more gesture to it. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're running just a tiny bit over time, and I think a great way to wrap up would be Kathleen Birch had a question about how you managed to get through airport security. And I would say, do you have a do you have a closing story that you would like to share about just when people probably at TSA unzip your suitcase and go, what is all this stuff? Like, do you have a funny
Yes.
airport story? Is
No,
my
I'll give
question.
you a really a clear one. When I right after 9/11, and I was touring as a drummer, I would bring a bass bow. The bass bow is the kind of thing you play a violin with, but you play a bass. It's big, and they were going to take it away from me at security. I said, "Why would you take this away from me?" And they said, "Well, you when you unscrew this part, which comes through the bow center of the bow, it's this long pin." He said, "You could stab somebody with that." And I looked at the woman. I said, "Why would I do that?" And then she looked at me, she said, "Oh, go ahead." And she just waved me through. So when a bass bow is dangerous, you know things are upside down. I had no problem traveling with this last year. It was like nobody opened the cases. They went through all of the different security processes and nobody seemed to look at it. The dogs came and walked by and didn't sniff at it. And I thought, okay. Because if you open it up and you touch it, it's like, oh, you know, it smells like paper. You know, it's definitely not contraband. So fortunately, I haven't had a problem. Again, I would.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We'll kind of wrap up. But thank you so much, Gino. It's
Well,
always
thank
such
you.
a pleasure to, hear about your process, to see you in action at the center. And I would say that if anyone has an opportunity to take a printing workshop with Gino here at the center, absolutely do not hesitate because the class always has a great time. He's a wonderful instructor and a fantastic artist.
I
So
teach the freestyle printing class when it's offered. So
yeah,
improvising. Thank
yeah,
you, Jenny, and thank you everyone for showing up. It's really nice to see
yeah.
so many
And oh, go
faces
ahead.
I recognize.
Yeah, it is great. What I will say is that next month for our From the Bench guest, we will have Ray Lanzarotti. That'll be on March 6th. And Ray works a lot with artists, accessibility issues, zines, and artist books. So I would encourage everyone to sign up for that as well. Thank you everyone for being here. And thank you, Gino, again. I can hardly wait to see you in the studio.
Yay.
And thanks for your questions, fabulous folks. And we'll see you next month at From the Bench. Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone. Thank you very much for coming.